All right, let me explain the phrase, I threw myself into work. This means that someone put all of their energy, focus, and effort into their work. It's like fully immersing yourself in what you're doing, sometimes to the point of being very intense or dedicated. People often say this when they're using work as a way to distract themselves or deal with difficult emotions.
After the breakup, I threw myself into work to keep my mind off things.
Here, the person is using work as a way to avoid thinking about their breakup. It can also be used when someone is excited or passionate about a new project or task.
When I got the promotion, I threw myself into work to prove myself.
The person is putting a lot of effort into their job because they want to show they are capable in their new role. Sometimes, people use this phrase to describe a period of intense focus and hard work, simply because they are dedicated to the task at hand.
With the deadline approaching, I threw myself into work to make sure everything was finished on time.
This shows the person working very hard, likely spending extra time and energy to meet the deadline. So, when you say, I threw myself into work, you're describing how you focused all your attention and energy on your work, either to achieve something, distract yourself, or simply out of determination. Does that make sense? All right, let me explain the phrase. It was just too hard for me to be around. This means that a situation or being in a certain place or with certain people was emotionally difficult for you. It suggests that something about the environment was overwhelming or painful, and you couldn't handle being there.
After my friend's death, it was just too hard for me to be around our old hangout spots.
The person finds it emotionally painful to be in places that remind them of their friend who passed away.
When my parents were fighting all the time, it was just too hard for me to be around.
The person feels uncomfortable and stressed because of the arguments and tension between their parents, so they avoid being near them.
After we broke up, seeing him at the office was just too hard for me to be around.
The person finds it emotionally difficult to be near their ex-partner at work after a breakup. So when you say, it was just too hard for me to be around, you're expressing that something about the situation made it emotionally overwhelming or painful for you to handle. You might feel the need to distance yourself because it's just too much to bear. Does that make sense? All right, let me explain the phrase, I was working on a few ideas for that. This means that you were in the process of thinking about or developing several possible solutions, plans, or approaches for a specific project or situation. It suggests that you're brainstorming or coming up with different ways to address something.
For the new marketing campaign, I was working on a few ideas for that.
You're developing different concepts or strategies for a marketing campaign, trying to come up with the best one.
The client asked for a redesign, so I was working on a few ideas for that.
You're brainstorming new designs to offer the client, exploring various options. Collaborative work.
For the group project, I was working on a few ideas for that before the meeting.
You're preparing different ideas or contributions to share with your team for the group assignment. So, when you say, I was working on a few ideas for that, you're indicating that you're actively thinking about different possibilities or plans for a specific task or challenge. It's a way to show that you're in the creative or planning stage. Does that help? Sure, let me explain. I just wasn't getting much attraction. This phrase means that something you were doing or working on wasn't receiving a lot of interest, attention, or success. It could refer to a lack of positive response or engagement from others. For example, if you were trying to promote a new product or idea, and people weren't showing much interest, you might say,
I just wasn't getting much attraction.
It means your efforts didn't draw the attention or response you were hoping for. Let's say you were running a social media campaign for a new business, and despite your best efforts, very few people were interacting with your posts. You could say,
I just wasn't getting much attraction.
To express that the campaign wasn't gaining the attention you wanted. Or imagine you're presenting a proposal to a team, and it seems like no one is really excited or engaging with your ideas. You might say later,
I just wasn't getting much attraction with that idea.
Meaning your idea didn't grab their interest. In general, it's a way of saying that something you were trying didn't catch on or didn't attract much attention. Does that clear it up for you? All right, let's go over the phrase, if there's anyone that you had a crush on. This is a way to ask someone if they ever felt a strong attraction or liking for another person, often in a romantic or emotional way. A crush usually means having feelings for someone without necessarily telling them, and it's often used to describe the early stages of attraction. For instance, you might ask this if you're talking to a friend about their past feelings or relationships. You could say,
So, is there anyone that you had a crush on when you were in school?
Here, you're asking if they had feelings for someone back then. You could also use it in a more casual setting. Imagine you're in a group of friends reminiscing about your younger days, and you turn to someone and ask,
Was there anyone you had a crush on in high school?
It's a lighthearted way to ask if they liked someone during that time. Another example could be if you're talking to someone about their current feelings. You might ask,
If there's anyone you had a crush on recently, who would it be?
This is a way of gently asking if they have romantic feelings for someone now or in the past. In general, it's a friendly, non-serious way of asking if someone ever liked another person, especially when it's more about admiration or a light romantic interest. All right, let's break down the phrase, I was like so awkward. This is a casual way to say that you felt really uncomfortable, unsure, or embarrassed in a particular situation. Awkward describes moments when you don't quite know how to act, or when things feel a bit off socially. People often use this when they're describing a situation where they didn't know what to do or felt out of place. For example, if you were at a party and didn't know anyone, you might say,
I was like so awkward.
to describe how uncomfortable you felt being there. Another common use is when you're talking about a time you made a mistake or said something that didn't come out right. Imagine you accidentally said something embarrassing in front of a group of people. Later, you might tell your friend,
I was like so awkward.
meaning you felt really uncomfortable in that moment. It's also common in conversations where you're describing interactions that didn't go smoothly. If you met someone for the first time and there was an uncomfortable silence or weird tension, you could say,
I was like so awkward during that conversation.
In general, it's a very informal, almost humorous way of saying that you felt out of place or uneasy in a particular situation. It's often used to laugh about those kinds of moments afterward. All right, let's go over the phrase, I didn't know how to do that without the crutch of alcohol. This means that the person is saying they relied on alcohol to help them do something, and they feel unsure or uncomfortable doing it without drinking. The word crutch here refers to something that gives support, but it's used metaphorically, meaning alcohol was like a tool or aid they leaned on to get through certain situations. You might hear this when someone is talking about how they used alcohol to help them feel more confident or relaxed. For example, if someone used to drink at social events to feel less nervous, they could say,
I didn't know how to talk to people without the crutch of alcohol.
meaning they relied on drinking to make socializing easier. It could also come up in situations where a person used alcohol to handle stress or difficult emotions. For instance, if they felt like they needed alcohol to calm down after a tough day at work, they might say,
I didn't know how to relax without the crutch of alcohol.
or it could be when someone is facing something challenging or uncomfortable, and they're used to drinking to cope. If they're trying to stop drinking, they might say,
I didn't know how to deal with stress without the crutch of alcohol.
In short, when someone says this, they're admitting that they felt dependent on alcohol to help them manage a specific situation, and without it, they feel unsure or vulnerable. Does that explanation make sense? All right, let's break down we actually decided to scrap that. This means that you and others made the decision to completely abandon or get rid of a plan, idea, or project. Scrap is a casual way of saying that you're no longer going to continue with something, and instead you're tossing it out. This might come up when you're working on a project and realize it's not going to work as planned. For example, if you were designing a product but found it wasn't turning out well, you could say,
We actually decided to scrap that.
meaning you've chosen to stop working on it and start over or move in a new direction. Another situation could be if you and your team were planning an event, but something went wrong or you found a better idea. Later, you might explain,
We actually decided to scrap that.
because you decided to cancel the original plan. It could also be used when talking about small things like personal plans. For instance, if you were planning to go on a trip but realized it wasn't possible, you could say,
We actually decided to scrap that.
when explaining to a friend that you're no longer going. So, when you use this phrase, you're saying that you've decided to stop something completely, as if throwing it away. Sure, let me explain. I knew how this kind of thing worked. This phrase means that the speaker already had experience or understanding about a particular situation or process. They're saying they were familiar with how something typically happens, based on their past knowledge or experience. For example, if you've been through similar situations before, like organizing events or handling certain challenges, you might say,
I knew how this kind of thing worked.
meaning you already understood what to expect and how to handle it. Let's say you were attending a business meeting and things started going in a direction you've seen before. You could later tell someone,
I knew how this kind of thing worked.
implying you knew what was likely to happen next. Another example could be in social situations. If you've dealt with drama or conflict in a group, and the same kind of problem arises again, you might say,
I knew how this kind of thing worked.
showing that you weren't surprised by what happened because you had experienced it before. So, this phrase is used when someone is confident that they understand how a situation will unfold because they've been through it or something similar in the past. Does that help clear it up? All right, let's talk about the phrase, because it was like a long, arduous process. This means that something took a lot of time and effort, and it wasn't easy. The word arduous suggests that the process was challenging, requiring a lot of hard work, perseverance, or struggle. You might use this phrase when reflecting on a project or experience that was particularly tough. For example, if you were working on a big project at school or work, you could say,
I was really relieved when it was finally done because it was like a long, arduous process.
This shows that completing the project took a lot of effort and was not straightforward. Another situation could be when you're talking about training for a marathon. You might say,
Training for the marathon was tough because it was like a long, arduous process.
indicating that getting ready involved a lot of hard work and dedication over many weeks or months. You could also apply this when discussing personal growth or learning something new. For instance, if you spent a long time learning a new language, you could say,
Learning to speak fluently was difficult because it was like a long, arduous process.
emphasizing how challenging and time-consuming it was to achieve your goal. So, when you say this phrase, you're expressing that whatever you went through required a lot of effort and felt very demanding.